Okay, then. Good morning, everyone. And we're going to carry on our discussion today about osmoregulation, and particularly today, we're going to be talking about the function of the kidney, how the kidney works to actually maintain homeostasis, osmolarity, but also how it excretes our major excretory product, which is urea. We do excrete a little bit of ammonia as well, but it's small compared to the amount of urea that we excrete. Ammonia, remember, is very, very toxic and requires a large volume of water to actually void it completely. So it's for us as terrestrial organisms, very inefficient to have ammonia as an excretory product. Instead, we excrete urea, which is far less toxic. It's more expensive metabolically to make it, but nonetheless, it conserves water and is an efficient and relatively non-toxic byproduct of nitrogenous metabolism. Okay, so just remember, this was the structure of the kidney that we saw before. Go back and review it if need be. But today, we're going to be talking a lot about the structure and the function of these bodies here, which are called the nephrons, which is the unit of function of the kidney. It's here in the nephron that all of the metabolic functions of the kidney lie. So we need to understand something about it. Don't worry. You see that they say here cortical duct, or all these different kinds of nephrons. It relates to where in the kidney they lie. Don't worry about it. Just remember, we're talking about the kidneys, and the major part that we're going to talk about today lies here in the cortex of the kidney. In the medulla of the kidney are all of the collecting ducts and some other parts that we'll talk about, these loops that you see here, and the collecting ducts are here in the medulla. The filtration mainly takes place here in the renal cortex. So I know this looks really complicated. I'll break it down into component parts. It becomes more understandable. What we're looking at here is actually two things. First of all, it's a really complex circulatory part of the circulatory system, specially adapted for its functions in the kidney. So first of all, coming in from the renal artery, here we see the renal branches of the renal artery. And what is really important for our purposes, it subdivides into the very thin arterioles. It's important to realize, this is not quite the same as the circulatory system we saw before, where the arterioles morph into capillaries and then which feed into the veins. The difference here is that we have to look at this whole loop here. Here's an arteriole. It branches into very fine knot of very fine arterioles here. They are arterioles because they're still under the blood pressure. They're under strong blood pressure. And they exit this knot as an arteriole here. Not as a vein or venule or whatever, but as an arteriole, because this is all under pressure there. It's part of its functioning. So we have arterioles there. Now they feed through capillaries, and the capillary beds here are very, very complex. Just come down here and have a look, and you'll see they form a net structure. What I mean by that is, have a look. You can see that in actual fact, here's the blood flows down here. There are branches here where it flows up, and there are cross branches between it. So it's a complete net structure. And it has a special name. It's called the vasa recta. And that is actually, translation means a net of blood vessels. and we'll see why why we have to have this rich supply of blood in this area. The blood flow is then off to the renal vein there. So remember, there's a complex blood circulatory system here, specially adapted for the functions of the kidney. But the other thing that we have to look at are these tubules here. And we'll start off the whole tube structure right here. This swelling like a bag structure around that knot of arterioles is called the Bowman's capsule. And it feeds into this tubular structure here. We'll break it down. First of all, this whole tubular structure here, which will be in the cortex of the kidney, this is called the proximal tubule. Proximal because it's next to the beginning. It's near the beginning. So it's the proximal tubule there. And it has very distinct functions. It feeds into this limb of here, which is called the descending limb. This tube descending down here is called the descending limb. This tube here is called the ascending limb. And this length of tubule here, by the way, this diagram is a little bit deceptive. It's not feeding in here, it's going behind there. Okay, that is one thing there. And this whole tubule here is called the distal tubule. The distal tubule then feeds into this here, which is called the collecting duct. And the collecting ducts, if I just go back here, the collecting ducts all feed in to join in together, join, and getting bigger and bigger and bigger until they feed into the renal pelvis and then off to the ureter. So what is going to happen is we're actually going to produce a fluid, and the fluid is going to be passed all through this whole system here, like this, and along the way it's going to be processed. And each of these parts of this tubular system here, the proximal tubule, the descending, the ascending, and the distal tubule, they all have their own properties. They have their own things that they do. To emphasize just before we start, a couple of the really important things that you need to remember. First of all, remember that the different parts can have quite distinct properties and do different things to the fluid that passes through them. This descending limb here it's semi-permeable, but it's highly permeable to water. It allows water to pass very freely out of it. This ascending limb here is impervious to water. It allows ions, it's still semi-permeable, but it allows ions to pass across it, but it does not allow water to pass across it. And this has important consequences. The proximal and the distal tubule have the properties that they can absorb things. For example, the proximal tubule is largely responsible for absorbing all the useful stuff like food, like nutrients, glucose, and things which might be present here. But at the same time, the proximal and distal tubule, the blood's circulatory system and cells which associated with the two can secrete stuff. So they can actually push stuff into this fluid, and at the same time they can absorb useful stuff from it. So they are selective in what they pick up. So I'll just very briefly, there's one last thing I need to tell you. And that is the collecting duct here is really important, because the collecting duct is not just a passive tube. In fact, its permeability to water, its ability to allow water to pass out is variable. And it's very varied under hormonal influence. When we need to absorb a lot of water, especially to bulk up our blood, to increase blood volume, then the permeability of the collecting duct is increased so that lots of water passes out and can be resorbed by the blood. Otherwise, it remains relatively impermeable to water, so that it just passes a relatively dilute urine. By the time the fluids reach here, we refer to it as urine, but it's not truly urine when it's up here. It's still being processed to form urine. So I'll just briefly, because I've actually got a little movie that probably explains it even better than I can. I'll just explain really briefly. This arterial knot here is called the glomerulus. And what is happening here, and remember, this is under the blood pressure, so the pressure is high in these vessels. They very suddenly they divide into this knot of very fine arterioles, and that increases the pressure in them. In a similar way to what we saw before in the blood capillary system, this increase in pressure is relieved by allowing fluid to leak across the walls of the arteriole. And this is the major filtration system in the kidney, is this glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule around it. Because the fluid leaks out and is gathered up by this Bowman's capsule, it's under some pressure. And it actually moves through the tubular system. As more and more fluid leaks out here, it's pushed through this tubular system. Basically, you can think of it that all that is filtered out is everything except the blood corpuscles, things like that. And some very large proteins, things like that, don't get filtered across. But a lot of stuff actually passes across the walls of the arteriole together with the fluid. And that includes all our urea, the waste product, but it also includes very useful things. It includes things like nutrients. It includes glucose. All of these sorts of things also pass across here into this fluid. Is the responsibility, first of all, of this proximal tubule to reabsorb the useful stuff and pass it into these capillaries here that surround the proximal tubule. At the same time, in this proximal tubule area, the cells of the blood vessels, but also cells associated with blood vessels and the proximal tubule, can actually secrete substances. And this is one of our really important ways, our significant ways of getting toxins out of the blood system and pushing them into the urine. This is one of the ways, for example, that we excrete drugs, ordinary drugs, anything like marijuana or cocaine or whatever, even the medicinal drugs you take. A lot of them actually get excreted here and put into the urine. That's how a urine test works. Okay? When somebody has a urine test for drugs, what you're picking up in that urine test are drugs that have been secreted into the proximal tubule here. Now, the fluid now is rich in urea, but it's also rich in salts as well. And the body now needs to regulate. This is where one of the major osmoregulatory processes takes place in the proximal tubule as well, because this is where the body can actually resorb salts. But the next part of the tubular structure is really significant, because this is where the water balance is regulated. In this descending and ascending tubule, there's a complex system for for allowing water to pass into the body tissues if need be, or to resorb it. It's here in this descending and ascending portion that the osmolarity of the blood, for example, is regulated by regulating the passage and absorption of water. The distal tubule here has many of the same functions as the proximal tubule, excepting it doesn't do as much nutrient absorption. Most of that is done in the proximal tubule, but it has some of the same functions. Drugs can be excreted here as well. In both proximal and the distal tubule, two things which are shunted back and forth by the proximal and distal tubule are protons, H+ ions, and bicarbonate ions. Now, as soon as I tell you that here in proximal and distal tubule, we can move these ions back and forth into this fluid, from blood into the fluid, or from the fluid into the blood. What do those ions do? H+ ions, if I increase the number of H+ ions in the blood, I'm going to lower the pH. If I increase the number of bicarbonate ions and decrease the concentration of protons, I'm going to raise the pH. So these are also important here in regulating the pH balance of the blood, in maintaining homeostasis of the pH of the blood. Now, all the fluid now has been extensively processed as it went through all of these, and now can be referred to as urine, and it is passed into the collecting duct. It's a relatively dilute. If we drink our normal amount of fluids, it is relatively dilute. We do conserve as much water as we can, but as it passes through the collecting duct walls can be varied under hormonal influence. And what happens is, if we need to absorb lots of water from the collecting duct, we release hormones, as we'll see in a while, which cause the body to put in lots of aquaporins into the cells. Now, the aquaporins are little ducts that allow the passive movement of water. And under hormonal influence, the cell structure of the collecting duct can be changed. So lots of aquaporins are put into the cell membranes, and lots of water will pass out of them and into the surrounding kidney tissue to recover water. If we need to recover water, that is what happens. Under normal circumstances, there's not so many aquaporins. We pass a relatively dilute urine. It's very complex. Okay, a lot of things happen. The way to work this out is to first of all get the structure clear in your mind. The structure, first of all, of the tubules here, and then second of all, how intimately the blood circulatory system operates together with them, and then understand that this is a pressure filtration system here. The glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, it's a pressure filtration system. So we got filtration, absorption and excretion. We've got water balance, water moved back and forth to actually regulate the osmolarity, the amount of solutes in the fluid here, and then again excretion and resorption here, and then this can also be used for water balance. Now, I just pray that this works for you. Please tell me if it doesn't.
Professor Muir.
Yes.
I was actually looking at the syllabus.
Hold on, sorry a minute. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was looking at the syllabus and I noticed that it says forensic syllabus for 1150. So I was thinking maybe somehow the wrong one got uploaded. It's not for GenBio, it's for forensics.
What? Which? Where?
The syllabus, the spring 2021 syllabus, I was checking to see when our next quiz was, and it's for forensics 1150, bio
Okay.
1150.
All right, I'll check it out, but let's concentrate on what we're doing here, okay? There's
Okay.
I'll check that out. I'll make a note to check it. I must have just
Okay.
uploaded the wrong one.
There's no sound on the video.
I beg your pardon?
I said there's no sound, right? Like we can't hear anything.
No. Can you none of you hear sound?
No, I don't hear anything.
Oh, Lord. Okay. Did any of you go through this before class and try this video? I just want to be sure that you can get sound yourselves when you.
No, I didn't go over it yet. The video.
Okay, that's a bit of a problem. Okay, let me just see. I'll tell you what he's saying. Okay, he's just saying it's exchange between this and the blood system. We're going to look at filtration, secretion, and reabsorption. These are the nephron tubules. These are the blood vessels. That's concentration, the solutes increase in concentration from there to there. There's the glomerulus, the knot of capillaries. That creates the fluid, which is gathered by the Bowman's capsule. So that's the filtration. This is the filtrate flowing through. This is the content of blood. That's taken out. They're too big to pass through into the fluid. All of this goes into that filtrate. So it's going, as it moves along, the proximal tubule can secrete substance like ions, hydrogen ions, bicarbonate ions, poisons, drugs, but this can also resorb. This is all in the filtrate. That needs to be taken out. That needs to be resorbed. Those are the nutrients. They need to be resorbed. This is everything that gets absorbed. Water, sodium chloride, the ions, glucose, amino acids. That's the reabsorption part. That's a pH regulatory function. Recovery of NaCl, that's an osmolarity, to maintain osmolarity, the homeostasis. That's the descending tubule. The solute concentration increases down here. Because of that, water passes passively out. This is concentrated. But as it ascends, this is impermeable to water, but it allows the salt to flow across. Distal tubule can also resorb things. Salt, bicarbonate ions, also drugs and poisons, and hydrogen ions. So again, this is a pH regulatory function. This I'll explain afterwards. Okay, I'm sorry that didn't work well, but I hope that when you go to this PowerPoint presentation, that that's available to you with the sound. Please let me know if it is not, okay? And then I'll try and sort something out. Although I think that it is available to you on my lab and mastering as well. So I know all of that is all seems very complicated and everything, and it is. The function of the kidney is extremely complex. And so let's just break it down into a couple of things, that pointers that will help you understand function. First of all, the kidney tissue itself maintains a particular environment, and then that is that there is a lower concentration of solutes out here in the cortex area than there is here in the medulla. And that the solutes that are present there in the tissues, there are two things which are significant. One is sodium chloride, that is the one, but the other is urea. It sounds a bit strange because after all, the function of the kidney is to excrete urea. But remember that urea is also it's toxic in very high concentrations, but it is tolerable. And what the kidney does is it allows a certain amount of urea to accumulate in the medulla. And the function of the urea there is to increase the osmolarity of that area of the kidney. So as we go through from the outside of the kidney to the inside, we see an increasing osmolarity, increasing concentrations, especially of salt, NaCl, and of urea as well. And this has an important function because a lot of the reabsorption of water from the filtrate as it passes through these tubes is by passive movement of water under osmotic pressure. So this is the function of maintaining high osmolarity here. It's so that the body can recover water from the filtrate. So remember our different functions. First of all, we have the filtration function here. That filtrate is collected by the Bowman's capsule and passes through proximal tubule. Proximal tubule, first of all, just look here. All the red arrows are active, is active transport. The proximal tubule actively moves hydrogen ions and bicarbonate, hydrogen ions actively. Bicarbonate is passive. But the movement of these ions here actually regulates pH. So this is one of the places where the body regulates the blood pH by manipulating hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. From the filtrate, the proximal tubule recovers NaCl. It recovers water. The water, by the way, flows out passively because of the increase in salt around in this environment. We also recover other ions, other useful ions, potassium, for example, and actively move the nutrients, amino acids, glucose, that sort of thing, out of the filtrate and back into the blood circulatory system. This is also a place where we where we excrete the small amount of ammonia that we produce as a byproduct. So the filtrate, by the time it reaches here, it'll be rich in urea. It'll still have some salt and everything, but the salt concentration will have been reduced. It'll have a small amount of ammonia, but it will no longer have nutrients and glucose, that sort of thing, or it shouldn't have. At the same time, in the same area here, the body can excrete drugs and toxins, put them into the filtrate. Now it moves into this descending loop. That whole loop structure, the descending and the ascending, this is called the loop of Henle, named for the person who first described it. The descending loop, a lot of water is recovered. Remember, this loop here is highly permeable to water. And as it moves through here, what is it doing? It's moving through through areas of increasing osmolarity, because the body deliberately increases the salt and urea concentration as we go through here. Water flows out passively. As it moves up here, this limb here, it is impermeable to water, but it allows the passage of salts. The salt will pass out passively, but it can be actively pumped out as well by the ascending loop. No water goes across. So we've recovered lots and lots of water here. As it comes up here to the distal tubule here, again, there's ion regulation to regulate pH of the blood, and other ions may be recovered as well. That's the descending loop. The collecting duct here. And the collecting duct also pumps out some salt, but it also allows the passage of urea and of water, and that can be regulated hormonally. This here, now we can refer to it as urine, passes into greater and greater and greater ducts into the pelvis of the kidney, and then out through the ureter to the bladder. So use in your revision, use this diagram, because it explains it also so simply, the structure of the tubules and then what their different responsibilities are. Okay, so I've said several times that there is extensive endocrine hormonal control of the function of the kidney. That is critically important because the kidney is doing so many things apart from the excretory properties of the kidney. It also regulates osmolarity of the blood. It regulates pH of the blood as well. And it also regulates blood volume. And so the kidney is one of the ways in which we maintain our blood pressure. And our blood pressure increases if we increase the volume of fluid inside our blood vessels. It will decrease if we decrease the volume of fluid that is flowing through the blood circulatory system. So this is the way in which the kidneys can influence blood pressure. There are other ways that blood pressure is regulated, by the way, and that is by constricting them, by getting the muscles in the blood vessels to constrict or relax. But the kidney is the one major contributor to blood pressure by regulating the amount of the volume that is present in our blood vessels. And that is under the influence of several hormonal systems. But here, this is the one which we'll think about for the moment. And that is, it's called antidiuretic hormone. A diuretic hormone is one which would cause you to pass increasing volumes of urine, of dilute urine. So that is a diuretic. Diuretic is something which causes you to lose fluid. An antidiuretic is something which causes the kidneys to take up as much fluid as possible, so that you would then produce a more concentrated urine. So antidiuretic hormone is actually a pituitary hormone. It's released from the pituitary in the brain, but that is under the control of the hypothalamus. We're going to learn a lot more when we talk about the endocrine systems. We're going to learn a lot more about these hormones. The pituitary hormones are most of them under the control of the hypothalamus. So here's this is one of the great homeostatic mechanisms in the body. Let's just think, you go to the gym and you work out very vigorously, or you go for a run, and while you're running, what are you doing? You're increasing your metabolism, you're increasing your body temperature, you sweat a lot, but you'll also breathe out a lot of moisture, of water vapor. And as a result, your blood volume actually decreases somewhat, and very importantly, the blood osmolarity increases, because you've lost water, you've increased the concentration of solutes in the blood. Well, the hypothalamus is one of the most important sensor systems in the body. It senses all sorts of physiological and environmental status. And one of the things which it does sense is your osmolarity. It's and whereas if the solute concentration of the blood begins to increase, the hypothalamus releases a hormone which travels to the pituitary and causes the pituitary to release antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone goes into circulation, and it has its activity on the collecting duct of the kidney. And it causes the cells, as I told you, to put more aquaporins into their cell membranes. And as a result of that, water begins to flood out. Remember, the collecting duct passes through this area of the kidney, which is itself very high in solutes. So water floods out of the collecting duct into the kidney and is taken up by the blood circulatory system and increases the blood volume, but it decreases the osmolarity of the blood. At the same time, I should tell you that the hypothalamus releases other hormones which cause the kidney to release hormones, which induce the sensation of thirst. That is where thirst is a real physiological response. It's not just the desire for water. It is it's a signal of a real physiological need. As the blood osmolarity increases, the sense of thirst is generated hormonally and causes us to drink. And if we're drinking a lot and our collecting ducts are absorbing a huge amount of water as it passes through, we very rapidly drop our osmolarity and increase our blood volume as well at the same time. Our blood osmolarity homeostasis is around 300 milliosmoles. It's just a measure of osmolarity, of osmotic pressure. Okay, so that's a relatively simple homeostatic mechanism, a typical feedback mechanism. Hold on a sec. Okay, so to finish off today, I'm actually want you on your own to have a look at the system which maintains blood pressure in the body. And this is another complex homeostatic mechanism. It actually links not only the kidney and the hypothalamus, it links the kidney and the liver, believe it or not, and the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are endocrine glands, which lie really close to the kidney. They're not part of the kidney. They're a separate organ entirely. But this is homework. This is required. And I see I haven't put a time on there, but let me decide. I'll give you a good, reasonable amount of time. It's I want you to research this in your text, and it's called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. That is a reflection of the hormones which are exchanged between the different parts of the system. Renin there being one of the hormones which is produced by the kidney in response to changes in blood pressure. So this 1 page or 2 pages is probably sufficient. That's 50 points for you. And I will, as I say, I will set a time limit for you. And that is required. This is not optional. This is a required piece of homework. Okay, so are there any questions?
I wanted to know the assignment that you just gave us, is that on my mastering?
About the story that I just gave you?
Yeah, the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, that's 50 points. Is that on my mastering?
No, just go to your textbook.
Okay.
Well, via that site, via the Pearson site. Yeah, go to your text. It'll be there. There may well be something in my lab and mastering as well.
Okay, so it's where we normally do our homework.
Correct. Yeah, it's not. This is, it's there just written out basically for
Okay.
you. It's not. You're not going to have to putz around all over the place to find the information. It's
Okay.
there as a unit of information.
And then also I was saying earlier, the wrong syllabus is up. It's for
Fine.
Introduction to Forensics, and I was trying to study ahead of time, and it's
Shame,
not for GenBio. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't know how that happened. That must have happened recently. I don't know how I did that.
Yeah, it's for Bio 1150 at 4
Yeah, right.
p.m.
Yeah. I don't know how I did that. All right then. I'll go back. I'll go in there now and change it.
Thank you so much.
All right then. Okay, everybody. Then have a good weekend.
For the homework.
Yep.
For the homework, how are we going to submit it? Like, is there going to be?
Oh, I can hardly hear you. Just repeat that.
Is there going to be somewhere to submit the homework on my lab, or do we have to email it?
Just email it. Yeah, email it to me.